can't believe you left it out again. Son, could you come here for a minute, please? I need to talk to you. Come here. Son, you know what I found in the front yard when I came home?
My bike.
That's right. And what have I told you about your bike?
To not leave it out in the yard.
That's right. And since you left it out in the yard again, for 3 weeks, I'm not going to allow you to use your computer. Do you understand me?
Yes, Dad.
I hope you learn your lesson soon, and you won't leave your bike out anymore.
Jeff, do you think the computer was the best punishment?
I don't know. It was all I could think of at the time.
Well, we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
And welcome again to another session of Growing Kids God's Way. We're going to be coming to the end of our discipline flow chart. We're going to be talking about natural consequences, logical consequences, isolation, and of course that very popular topic, chastisement. Anne-Marie, in that little vignette we just saw, a father was handing out some consequences for a behavior, for an action. I guess the question is whether or not that was reasonable and logical.
Right, and that's part of what we're going to discuss tonight, making sure that the punishment does fit the crime.
Right. You know, get your outlines ready, pens and pencils. Our class is going to join us in just a few moments, and we'll be right back. Well, in our last two sessions, and in this particular session, we have been talking to you about the process of discipline. What does it look like? Encouragement, correction. We're going to be adding to your knowledge in this session as we continue with filling out that chart, that discipline flow chart. But we have not yet talked about discipline issues. I do want to encourage you to understand we're going to get there. I mean, we haven't really talked about temper tantrums, frustration tantrums. We haven't talked about lying, stealing, cheating. We haven't talked about little brothers and sisters not treating each other nicely, or what happens when children talk back to you. We have yet to talk to you about what happens when you parents give your children too many choices too early. So there's a lot more things that we're going to have to communicate, but we have to finish the process side first. Now, in our last session, I introduced you to the correction side of motivational discipline, and I talked to you about foolishness and childishness. I also talked to you about punishment, and I threw out a couple of times the word consequence. I want to help you understand the relationship between punishment and consequence before we go any further. I know we left off with pain. That was F1, and you could write that in if you like on your outlines for this particular session. We left off with pain. But before we talk about the type of pain, you need to understand the big picture. Punishment is used predominantly in the early years. And natural and logical consequences, two issues that we've already introduced and I will talk more about in this session. Natural and logical consequences are used more during the later years. So what you have is a very interesting relationship. In the early years with your 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, you will be using a lot more punishment. But as your child grows older, you will be declining in the amount of punishment, but you will be increasing the amount of natural and logical consequences. Now, why is that? Well, this is the reason. Punishment and natural and logical consequences, first of all, are not the same thing. That's why I'm presenting this to you. Because moral truth is imparted during the early years, punishment will be used much more than the natural and logical consequences, because punishment serves a moral purpose. What you are doing, as we talked in our last session, is you are placing value on an offense. A child is learning more than just right and wrong. They are learning the weight of right and wrong. They are learning the weight of an injustice. You are instilling that into the moral fabric of their hearts. You are giving them a value of their wrong. That's what punishment does. And as I said last time, children understand and learn their value of justice from punishment, not from rewards. That's where it comes from. That's where the value is set. Now, as the child's growing up, as moral training has gone into their hearts, you will not have to use punishment to help direct them to an understanding of the value of their wrong. You will start using more logical and natural consequences, because that is associated with the wisdom choices. That is associated with the mistakes they make. It's not that they're going to ever escape doing wrong things or morally wrong things. They, like you and I, we still do those things. But the characterization of your child, once they enter those middle years, 8, 9, 10, and then into the teen years, what you should be using more and more of is logical and natural consequences. Well, why? Because in adulthood, we really do not get punished, do we? I mean, if we rob a bank, the two officers in this crowd are going to put me in jail. If I did that, they would put me in jail. That would be punishment. But let's face it, 95% of all the behavior that we demonstrate in adult life, if we make a mistake, we suffer consequences. So it's best then, after a child's learned what is right and wrong morally in the early years, that we prepare them as moms and dads to know how to rightly deal with consequences. Better than that, rightly have the wisdom to do those things that are right, that will not bring negative consequences into their life, that's going to help them learn from their lessons. With that little introduction on punishment and consequences and the difference and when you're going to use them, let's now go back to F1, pain. As I shared with you in the last session, pain is a gift from God. I believe theologically, when God created Adam and Eve, that He created Adam and Eve with pain. I personally do not think pain is something that came onto humanity as a result of man's fallen sin. Of course not. Pain is a gift of God. I believe before the fall, if Adam stubbed his toe on a rock in the Garden of Eden, it would have hurt. Because pain itself is not evil. Pain itself is not moral in any way. Now, pain draws attention to a condition that needs to be fixed. That's why we believe pain in the early years is going to help redirect the child to right behavior. Now, how is that going to happen? In the training process, pain is going to come one of two ways. Either there will be natural pain, or box F2, write in natural consequences, or box F3, please write in the words structured consequences. In other words, with natural consequences, pain is the natural outcome of disobedience. A mother, let's say a mother was with her daughter, and they were at the bus stop, and mom noticed that there were cracks in the sidewalk and the child is going around in circles. And now mom says, honey, I don't want you running anymore on the sidewalk. You're going to fall down and get hurt. But the child completely ignores mom and does that one more turn, and in fact trips on the crack, falls down. Now the knees are all stinging and they're red and maybe a little blood. You wouldn't say, well, you disobeyed me. I'm going to have to deal with you on this. God has already dealt with the child in a very natural way. The sin has created pain, the knees that are stinging. In that moment, that's when mom will teach into it. That's when mom will talk about obeying her and the need to follow mommy's wisdom and point out the pain that has come because the child disobeyed. You don't say, and they hurt, and when you get home, it's going to hurt more. You're not going to do that. You don't need to do that. See, that's the natural consequence. In fact, when you can, look for the natural consequence. But sometimes our children do wrong things. They disobey us. They're defiant. And there are no natural consequences, just the joy of their sin. What do you do then when you find this? That's when you must create structured consequences. F3, as we've already said, speaks to this. Pain is not always the natural consequence of foolish behavior. So when it does not come naturally, we need to create it as moms and dads. We need to create it artificially. Structured consequences, then, comes by way of, here's three ways it comes. Through logical consequences that we are going to introduce into the child's life. Logical consequences. Number two, through isolation, that would be box F5. F4 is logical consequences. Box F5 is isolation. And box F6 through chastisement. chastisement. Chastisement is the biblical term for the cultural expression spanking. I like to use the word chastisement. It's a biblical term. Let's go back to logical consequences. Pain that comes through logical consequences. A child asks, Mom, may I go over to Sally's house after school? And Mom says, yes, you may do that, but you need to be home at 5 o'clock. Now, the daughter goes off to her friend's house, but she ignores the time. Mom and Dad have dinner on the table. They're waiting for her. She doesn't come home to 5:30. And you say, well, what happened? You're supposed to be home at 5 o'clock. Well, let's say that this is the first time. Class, tell me, what would we do? This is the first time it's happened. You tell me. Go on. Why? Why warning? Let's see how well you've done. Why warning?
Not characterized by that behavior.
Right. They're not characterized. This is the first time. Just needs a warning. But let's say, you know what? We have seen this. I've given you a chance to demonstrate and prove yourself because we've held you back, and now you've done it again. So what should we do? Should we, well, let's see. Should we take away her radio? Should we take away her bike? Should we not let her go to the youth group tonight? Now, the logical consequences, honey, you're not ready to handle the responsibility of going to your friend's house after school. You need to first come home. That's what we're going to take away. You see, the logical consequence needs to be reasonable. It needs to be logically associated with the offense of the child. That is one way of bringing pain into the child's life, is that they are losing a responsibility. I should say they're actually losing the privilege because they are not responsible. They are losing the privilege. It needs to be connected. That is logical consequences. Now, isolation. Children are social beings. Isolation means temporarily taking a child away from the privilege of social contact. You guys you have your children over. You have a couple of moms. They're all playing out in the backyard. Now, what happens, Tony, is that the children are all coming to you, and they're saying, you know, your son Anthony is throwing sand. And so you say, Anthony, I don't want you throwing sand anymore. Don't be doing that. And then they all go back out. And a few minutes later, they come back in. Now he's throwing stones. Well, Anthony knows sand is a little tiny stone, and a stone is a big grain of sand. Therefore, you will then say, you know what, we've talked about this. You know that you've crossed the line. You're losing the privilege of playing with your guests. Now, I want you to go to your room, and they're going to play. And that may be 10 minutes. That may be a half hour. But the point is, the pain that's going to come is the loss of social contact. That's the purpose of isolation. Now, some parents will say, you can go to your room and do whatever you want. Or you may say, which probably would be more appropriate if you're bringing punishment into the life of the child, you need to go to your room, and you're not allowed to do anything but sit on the bed. I will be in 10 minutes. You understand? That's isolation, removing the child. You could use isolation early, from taking a 10-month-old out of a high chair all the way up to pre-adolescence. So isolation is another way of bringing pain into the life of your child. But the third one, and this is where we're going to spend a little bit more time and energy, is on F6, chastisement, spanking. Spanking. We are commonly asked, do we believe that the Bible condones spanking? Or, I should put it this way, we are commonly asked, do we believe the Bible mandates spanking? And our answer is no, we don't. We do not believe the Bible teaches that we must spank our children. Now, follow this very carefully. What we believe is that what the Bible is teaching us very clearly is that spanking, whenever it appears in Scripture, it is always associated with wisdom training. Always associated with moving a child from foolishness to wisdom. We don't think they're actually, it says, thou shalt spank on these occasions. But the reason why God, the Holy Spirit, gave it to us and why it works so well is because it is what God says we are to use, and He demonstrates this, to bring about wisdom, replacing foolishness with wisdom. That's why Proverbs 22:15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of reproof, more than just verbal correction, the rod that's going to drive it far from the child, that is the foolishness far from the child. So if you push us to the wall and say, do you really believe the Bible commands that we spank? No. Why do we believe it? because it's part of wisdom literature. Wherever you find the instructions on spanking, the encouragement, it's part of wisdom literature. It is right there speaking of bringing wisdom into the life of a child. Let's define chastisement. Begin right here. Chastisement means to inflict pain with controlled force to amend an inner attitude. Inflict pain with controlled force. Not a mom or dad that are going off after the child in some terrible way, but with controlled force. What's the purpose? To amend behavior, to get to the attitudes of the heart. Now, we believe there's a great deal of difference between the model of spanking we see in the culture and the society and some of the guidelines of biblical chastisement. It's not that the Bible specifically lays down guidelines, but from the greater body of biblical revelation, we learn much about the dignity of man, and we're able to piece together a picture of what chastisement should look like. Let's work through, you have a place in your outline, work through these differences to help you understand the big picture. Number one, cultural spanking is something parents do to a child. Biblical chastisement is something parents do for a child. Cultural spanking is a reaction activated by frustration. Parents just, finally they reach the point of breaking and they go after the child. But biblical chastisement is a response activated by the objective act of rebellion. Cultural spanking is used as a punishment of last resort. Biblical chastisement is not even an act of punishment so much as an act of love. Cultural spanking attempts to change outward behavior. Biblical chastisement is used to change inward attitudes of the heart. Cultural spanking is performed throughout a child's life. Biblical chastisement is nearly completed by the age of 5. Not all completed. For you who have 6-year-olds thinking that, oh, we don't have to do it anymore. No, that's not what I said. It's nearly completed when it's done early. Cultural spanking frustrates the child because the child usually never knows when it's coming. Biblical chastisement clears the child's guilty conscience. Guilty conscience. Remember the development of the conscience? You are inputting into the heart of your child a value system. You have put into the moral warehouse these high standards, these values that the conscience is going to respond to. We talked about the warning mechanism when they're about to do wrong, and then the accusing mechanism. When they do wrong, guilt is there. What is going to get rid of the guilt? Simply putting a child on the chair is not going to get rid of the guilt. That's why chastisement is so important in a young child's life, because it frees the child's heart up. It cleans the heart out. Because the child knows when they're carrying the weight of sin in their heart. We actually know some children that have gone up. We know of some very close friends who, the children, mom had a baby, and you know that week that for the sibling anything goes. That one sibling came up to mom about a week after that baby was in the house and said, "Mommy, my heart hurts. My heart hurts." And so the mother said, "No, Matthew, why? Have you done something that you shouldn't have done?" And he said, "I've done a lot that I shouldn't have done." And the fact is, it wasn't just simply the confession. He was saying, clean out my heart. You got a child that is constantly going. You know what? You've dealt with it here, and you dealt with it here, and you dealt with it, and you're wondering what's going on. There may be a child in your home that is continually acting in a very rebellious state, and you don't know what to do. It may be that they're carrying extra guilt and that the spankings up to this point have not worked simply because maybe they haven't been appropriate. Maybe they haven't been hard enough. Enough to get the child upset, but not enough to clean the child's heart. If you're going to work in biblical character development, if you're going to put these top shelf values in the heart of your children, you need to understand that conscience has got to be cleared when guilt enters the child's life. Or you're going to end up having a child that's going to become very hyper in their behavior because they're trying to act out and get attention to, "Mommy, Daddy, look at me. Help me get rid of this guilt." And they're calling for something as basic as a spanking. Let's go on. Cultural spanking has no long-term purpose or effect. Where are you going to go with it? Biblical chastisement molds lifelong character. You have a purpose for this. You know where you're going. I can't imagine if you have no moral plan, ladies and gentlemen, no moral plan, if you don't know where you're going, then why in the world would you do this to your child? That's only going to serve the parent's purpose. Cultural spanking is used by most Christians, I think. Biblical chastisement is probably rarely used. We have to learn how to do it and do it right. Now let's go on. Let's talk about the when of chastisement. Here's some guidelines to consider, just basic. Number one, chastisement is a personal matter. For the Ezzos, this is a major thing. It is a personal matter. By that, you know what we mean? It is between parent and child. It's not something we broadcast to the neighborhood. It's between parent and child. This is not something that we're going to demonstrate to the whole world. It is really a very intimate act. You think about it. The child that you brought into this world, that you gave life to in cooperation with God, you are now going to strike that child in an appropriate means on the backside. That is so intimate. That can only come from a love relationship. That's why it's a personal thing between parent and child. Number two, chastisement should not be done in public. Write that word. Nor should it be done out in public. Let me explain this. It shouldn't be done in public in your backyard when you have all the friends are over, or out in the public. There's no need to chastise. You think, well, but if I don't, there's trouble. My child will hold me hostage. Well, I'll go into that shopping mall, and that child knows if nothing happens, ladies, that could be a frightening prospect, right? Being held hostage by a 3-year-old. Here's what you do. A friend of ours did this. Anne-Marie advises moms, look, take a day. Plan this into your day, that we're going to train the child to understand that mom's word means something and there's resolve behind it. So when you go to the mall and you know that this child's going to blackmail me. One mom went and she had this problem. Anne-Marie advised her what to do. She went to the mall and she said to her daughter, honey, stay in the stroller. Daughter, as mom was pushing it, started getting out. Mom said, stay in. And now, the daughter, of course, this is how it works, right? She started to disobey at the other end of the mall. Mom had resolved in her mind, if this happened, based upon Anne-Marie's instruction, that to take the daughter and say to her, we're going home and we're going to deal with this. When the daughter found out that mom was going to leave the mall. And so mom picked up the child, of course, the next thing is to scream, so that everyone is looking at this child. Now, moms, when that happens, you make sure everyone knows you're the nanny, you're not the real mother. No, the child is screaming. So the child screamed all the way down to the end of the doors where she was exiting, and this is what the child said when she got there. She stopped her crying and screaming and said, Mommy, I love you and I'll be good now. And the mother said, no, we are going home to deal with this. It only took this mom one day, one time, that's all, just one time. You see, the child knew previously there was no resolve when mom said, we're going to deal with this. No, you're not going to. You got to be good, stay in your care. There was no resolve. In one day, in one morning, mom was able to demonstrate her resolve. That set deeply into the mind of the child, in the memory of the child. The child did remember. Number 3, chastisement should not be done in front of other people, nor should it be done in front of other children. Number 4, chastisement should not be done on bare skin. There's no reason to spank on bare skin. Moms, yes, okay, you've got a 20-month-old in a diaper. You're not going to spank over the diaper. That's going to do nothing. So, yeah, you may pull up the diaper in that case. But normally, it should not be done on bare skin. But you should not do it on bare skin for more than just injury's sake. You should not do it on bare skin to preserve the dignity of the child. The idea of saying to your daughters as a father, honey, now you just drop that skirt right now. Daddy's going to spank you. You are robbing your daughter of the feminine dignity that belongs to her. You don't need to do that. If you just get an instrument that will go through, but you don't need to do that. Let's continue. Number 5, children should only be spanked on the bottom. There's no pulling hair, no pulling arms, no slapping in the face, no dragging the child by the neck. The bottom is what God has created to have enough extra muscle and fat that's where you should direct your aim. Number 6, avoid last resort spanking. That is a bad idea. Now, why is that a bad idea? Because what ends up happening is that you remove all objectivity from your first-time instructions. If you're going to spank the child only when you are frustrated, only when everything's out of control, the likelihood is that you're going to abuse your child. If you let the child determine the spanking, how? By violating first-time obedience. If you become the threatening, repeating parent, or if you just decide you're not going to get up out of the chair, then until you get frustrated, you're going to have a lot more frustration, and then you're going to go after your child with that frustration. That's too dangerous of a situation. Number 7, if you're going to spank, then you must be consistent. And you could write this in also, please. If you're going to spank, then you must be consistent with the standard and your spanking. Be consistent with the standard and your spanking. Number 8. The goal of chastisement is not to humiliate a child. It's not to shame the child into right behavior. It's not to intimidate the child by making the child a public example. It's to bring the right amount of pain into their life to help them understand the direction they're going in is not a good direction. It is to place a value on an offense so that your child will become moral and understand very clearly there are some things in this life that you cannot do that hurt other people. And there are things in this life that we must do to help other people. The wrong side is going to be corrected through logical consequences, natural consequences, isolation, but also through chastisement. Now, what is covered in your Growing Kids God's Way text that I'm not going to talk about? Just so that you know where you're going to go in this particular lesson in the homework assignment. We're going to be talking in the book about chastisement and the Scriptures. What do the Scriptures say about it? We're going to be talking about chastisement, when and why. We're going to be talking about objective versus subjective spanking. We're going to be talking about breaking the child's will or breaking the child's spirit. We're going to talk about what do you do before and after chastisement. And there's a number of examples that we have in there that will help you, because you will not always do the same thing after you chastise in each situation. We're going to talk about chastisement and the appropriateness and the child's age. We're going to be talking about why chastisement sometimes fails to work. And then we're going to be talking about the warnings of child abuse and how parents can move across that line very easily, unintentionally, but because they do not follow some of the basic precepts, such as do not let spanking be a last resort type of punishment. Let me just summarize what we have thus far. We have worked through now all of the elements of the discipline flow chart. We have talked about the encouragement side, we've talked about childishness, we have talked about foolishness, we've talked about how to bring correction for childishness and foolishness. We've talked about natural consequences, logical consequences, chastisement, isolation. You're going to take some of these notes and you're going to put it back into your flow chart. We want you to know your flow chart. Listen, make a copy of it. Put it up on the refrigerator with a magnet. If you could visualize where you're going, moms and dads, you're going to better be able to understand, what do I do in this situation? What should I do in this situation? When my child does this, what should I do? Now, in our next session, we're going to continue with the issues dealing with motivational discipline, but we're going to be looking at the relational side. Repentance, forgiveness, restoration, and restitution. Those elements are all very important. Why would you just correct your child? Why would you just chastise? The whole issue is relationship. We want to restore the child. Now, what does restoring the child look like? That is in our next session. In a few moments, Anne-Marie's going to join me doing some question and answers. We're going to talk about the wrap-up. I know that you guys, I could tell by your faces, you are ready to ask your questions. So, honey, why don't we get ready and we'll go to the wrap-up. Okay, Anne-Marie, this one we dealt with, let's see here, natural consequences, logical consequences, isolation, chastisement. That's always an interesting subject. So let's get your thoughts, and I know they're loaded with questions already, so let's talk about it.
Yes, and because chastisement was a part of this, I want to emphasize the point from Scripture. Proverbs 29:15 says, the rod and reproof, or instruction is another way of saying it, give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. So it's not just the correction from the rod part, it's an instruction that remains critically important. So we want to make sure that you remember that. And the other thing, too, is you're trying to think through, some of the tools to use, the logical consequences you mentioned, isolation. If you have a real social child, sometimes the pain of isolation means is going to be a lot more effective in reaching their heart than the pain that comes through a structured consequence such as chastisement. So, you know, especially if you have the child that you might say, oh, I think you need to go spend some time sitting on your bed for a little bit thinking about this. And they say, Mom, would you just spank me instead? You know, because what they're not saying to that is, would you just, let's get this over with so I can go out and play. So, you know, especially if they say that, you might think, no, I think the best thing for you is to go sit for a little while in your room and using that. The other thing, too, I want to share about chastisement, that this is not a tool to bring your child into submission with.
You can't beat them in submission.
You cannot. That is not the purpose of biblical chastisement. There is a time and a place, and it's to be used appropriately. If you find yourself getting into a power struggle, and we've got some of that written in the book, you know, you back off. That's not the purpose. And thinking again about the consequences for behavior, really the main goal and objective is to bring our children to wisdom so that they realize with any behavior, if it's positive, it's right behavior, they get affirmation and encouragement, and if it's negative behavior, there's negative consequences. Either way, they're receiving consequences. One's positive, one's negative, but that's going to really help them to grow in wisdom that's there. And the other point, too, that I wanted to share was remembering that the guideline is, as Gary so well put, by the time they're 5, if, that's a little word, but make it caps if you started and were consistent from the beginning, you're nearly finished. But too often we've had parents say, oh, my child's 6, so I can't spank them anymore. No, we're not saying that. And I want to emphasize that again in the wrap-up because that's an important thing. If there's rebellious behavior, I mean, the child could be 10 and might still need chastisement brought into their life. And I just think of Hebrews 12:11. I'll just real quickly read from that. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. And that's what we're looking for, that peaceable fruit of righteousness that our children are going to have. And one more, also from Proverbs 10:17, he who keeps instruction is in the way of life, but he who refuses correction goes astray. And children don't usually, especially in the beginning, say, oh, thank you, Mother and Father, for correcting me and bringing this instruction into my life. I mean, we wish that they would do that, but you know that scripture in Proverbs that talks about the Proverbs 31 woman, we'll bring dads in on that too. That whole scripture where they're going to rise up and call you blessed,
They'll do it.
They'll do it. But probably not until they're well into their teen years, maybe even young adulthood. So they will be thankful. I know that they will be along the way. But for them to fully realize all that you are investing in their life right now, it's going to be several years before they see that.
Honey, I don't want necessarily go back to the opening scenario that we saw at the top of this session, but I do want to remind you about the importance of proper administration of punishment. I want to remind you again, do not under-punish, do not over-punish, understand the doctrine of punishment, understand that you are setting a value on an offense. That's why finding the right balance is so important. So I'm done. Do you have anything else? Because they're ready for questions. So why don't we go ahead and let's start with your questions. Who's going to be first? Okay, Paul's going to be first. Paul, go ahead.
My question regards the timing of chastisement. You mentioned that if you're in public, then you should definitely wait until you get home. What are some other valid situations where you should wait a while before you chastise?
Oh, let's say Aunt Martha came to visit from out of town, and Aunt Martha is very sensitive to all of the children. There's times when you may postpone because you have company in your house. That would be a valid time. It's not that you're going to say, okay, you kids are off the hook because Aunt Martha's here, but what you are going to do is be sensitive to and honor the guests that you're there. Instead of putting them on edge, and people do get on edge when other people spank their children, instead of putting them on edge, there may be some discretion that is necessary. Or you may decide, Mommy's not going to spank you for this offense today, but this is what we are going to do. And you give that other consequence. What other time would there be, honey? I mean, it's obviously you're not going to do it in a local setting, whether you're among friends, you're not going to do it in church, things like that.
Right. So, I mean, the context really is going to be the guide, but I think the issue of being sensitive when you are either in someone else's home or if there are people in your home that just are really struggling with the whole idea. That might be.
Okay. Who's next? Wes? Okay. Go ahead, Wes.
My question expands on Paul's question. Obviously, you need to wait in order to chastise. What's an appropriate length of time to allow that to go on?
Well, of course, it all depends on the child's age, and it all depends on how long is it going to be before you get home. Are you talking a couple hours, a couple weeks? So those things have to actually be considered. Normally, what we have found, easily a 21, 22-month-old who is familiar with the resolve of mom and dad, knowing it's going to happen, that child has a 3 to 5 hour memory. In fact, it's so easily tested. If you have a child that age and you're in the store and something happens and you give them the wink or you say, you know, we're going to deal with this when we get home, more than not, that child's going to be sitting in the little car seat, and as you're driving home 2 hours later, they're going to begin a conversation with you. And it opens up usually like this: Mommy, I love you. That's a sign. That is definitely a sign. You may have forgotten. The child has not. So you do want to give some consideration. If it's 9 o'clock in the morning, you've gone to the beach, and you're going to say to the children, well, when we get home, we're going to deal with this. You're going to get a spanking. And you're not going home to 9 o'clock at night. That's a bad decision. That's too long. We need to find some other consequence. Maybe you're not going in the water. You're not going to be building that sandcastle. So you want to have some sensitivity to that.
Yeah, but as a general rule, and usually the context will be that you're going to be able to administer correction within a short period of time. But for those extenuating circumstances, you know, and you will be amazed if you are consistent. Your children will end up reminding you. It's kind of mind-boggling from an adult's perspective, but they do remind us.
Studies have shown that children, even 10, 11, 12 months of age, have a complete cognitive memory of 2 weeks. And I tried this. If you put a cookie, like with Ashley coming in at 10 months, 11 months, someplace in there, put a cookie, say, Ashley, want this cookie? And you put it under the couch cushion, say, come and get it. She would come over and she'd pick it up and she'd get the cookie, and I said, the cookie's yours. 2 weeks later, when Ashley returned to Grandpa's house, and you put if I put the cookie under the cushion and I say, Ashley, go get the cookie, Ashley will go right to that cushion and get the cookie. And it's amazing to think, boy, she's only a year and she can remember that. Think what they can remember in 2 hours. Okay. Another question. Who else? Who's got it over here? Okay. Well, let's keep it over here. Clay, you got a question?
Gary, as you know, we have a lot of children to go around and bless the grandparents with, and so one of the things we want to run across is wondering, how do we delegate the chastisement? Our children will go to the grandparents for 3-4 weeks at a time sometimes, and during that period of time, it's obvious they're going to need some correction, some chastisement. How do we delegate this?
Well, this is a very touchy situation here, because what I could share with you, knowing you and Eleanor, may not necessarily be the panacea for everyone, and I want all of you to understand that. Let me share with you the norm of our belief system, then I'll share the exceptions, or honey, you could jump in and share some of the exceptions, as in this case. The norm of our belief system is this: chastisement is an intimate, personal thing. We believe only parents should chastise their children, no one else. When the grandchildren come to our house, different than yours, because your parents are back in the south and in the east, when the grandchildren come to our house, the only thing I need to do, if they need chastisement, I never administer it. I only need to let them know that is something you have just done that needs spanking for, and I will be informing your dad. That means more to them. Because their dad reinforces it, we rarely ever have a problem or have to send those grandchildren home knowing that they're going to receive a spanking. The other thing that you guys have to keep in mind is the reason why we're able to do it with Robert and Amy and Paul and Jenny and have the dads handle it when the kids get home or when the dads and mom pick up the kids is because we are all like-minded. Morally, we're all on the same page. We are that second generation that's helping to instill the virtues and values into the first generation. So normally our belief system is babies should or should not spank. Other people should not spank your kids. Exceptions, okay, honey, we got some maybe the long-term babysitting exceptions. That may be one. The swat on the hand may be an exception different than the chastisement. But no one else will love your child like you love your child, and no one else will be capable of carrying out this most intimate act of correction as mom and dad. There will be some exceptions, the long-term babysitting situation, the children going off with the grandparents as in your situation, but your situation is not necessarily the norm, so let's give them the exception.
Right, and that's where context comes into play again. And the other thing is the like-mindedness. You know, if, you know, in your situation with the grandparents, they understand what you're working towards, and let's face it,
There's no way.
the grandparents just
No
aren't
way.
going to do it the way they're supposed to. And I know, just even like Gary already said, the arrangement that we have with our own children, that does not mean that the grandparents or the babysitter or someone else does not have some alternatives. I mean, it's not infrequent if I have the girls fold their hands, or there is a loss of a privilege that they use. But if you're talking for periods of weeks, there may be an occasion when that is needful. And usually when the grandparent particularly, knowing that everybody's working together on this, has to administer a spanking to even one of the grandchildren, that's enough to think, oh, I think everybody else kind of goes on guard, because they realize that had to have been pretty bad if Grammy and Grandpa had to do that. And the other thing is, I realize that we are going to have parents that are taking the class, and that mom is working outside the home. And so the child is with a provider, grandma or some other family member possibly, or even a close friend. You know, if they have been through the class with you, they know what you're working towards, that again might be an exception to the rule, but the general rule would be that mom and dad administer the correction.
It is, again, it's an intimate act of love. That's why, that's our opinion on that. Okay? Maybe time for one or two more questions.
Regarding consequences, logical consequences for foolishness or childishness for that matter, is there a principle that you could share to help determine how long, like for loss of privileges, how long, because the purpose of loss of privilege is not just to do it just for punishment's sake, but to change their heart. And is there something we should look for to know that it's time to re-grant that privilege, that perhaps they can handle it now?
Well, you gave part of the answer. Part of the answer is to realize that we're not punishing. When we're using the logical, natural consequences, even though there may have been an offense, we still want to work on amending the heart, helping the child learn a lesson, move the child along in the moral pathway. When you look at a loss of a privilege, though, only mom and dad can determine, consider context, consider the age of the child, the characterization. Only you can determine how long that is going to be. I don't know if there's a specific principle that would apply to everyone, but it's just generally you need to superintend your own child, know how long. Now, I can tell you, our daughter Amy, she responded to anything very quickly. I mean, it doesn't matter what correction was. Amy was one of those high speed, let's get it fixed, let's go with it. And Jennifer, she's like her niece Whitney. She loves life, and she loved the color of life, and she loved sometimes the prohibitions of life, and it took her maybe a little bit longer to come to the standard that we wanted her. Now, that's the difference between children. You're going to have to make that judgment. Let me see if Anne-Marie can join here.
I'd pretty much concur with that. You know, usually the younger the child, the shorter the amount of time. And as they, obviously as they get older, it might need to be longer. But, you know, you don't want to overcorrect. So even if you came, and there's nothing wrong, you know, with holding a privilege, and let's just hypothetically, we'll say it's for a couple of days. And you see that there's still, you know, you're not seeing any kind of a heart change. And obviously, if there's something that's habitually happening, you're going to have some conversations about this in periods of non-conflict. Not to drag up their sin, but just to see how they're doing. And you might decide, you know, I think maybe we might need to extend this a little bit. Or you might, by the other hand, say, you know, it seems like you are really beginning to understand. We are going to give this back to you now.
Great. Any last questions? Yes, Belinda.
My question has to do with chastisement. How should we deal with chastising when we're traveling on a long trip? And what type of instrument should we use?
Okay. Obviously, when you're on a long trip, you're not going to be home, so you're going to be somewhere out in public, even if it's in the car. Let's just talk about the use of discretion. We are still going to work on that first-time obedience. We're not going to say once we leave our own property that, kids, you can do anything you want. You want to reinforce the standard. You want to keep the yes, mommy, yes, daddy going. And yes, there will be times when you're going to use the chastisement. But in this context, very discreetly. Okay, you're going to have to. If you're gone for 2 weeks, you're going to have to. You're visiting friends, let's say. You're traveling out of state. First of all, if you know these friends are like-minded, then it's not going to be a problem, right, Belinda? But if these are people who struggle with chastisement, well, that's a decision you made when you decided to go visit them. So there are going to be some things that you're going to not so much let go, but you're going to have to find another way to correct them. Regarding what instrument, what kind, what you should use, that is spelled out in your work assignment this week, your homework assignment this week. And we went to great lengths to try to bring as many qualifiers and just to make this whole section very, very clear. So I invite you to the workbook to chat about that. Hun, some thoughts from you?
Well, the only other thing, too, the beauty of being consistent with your children is that when you go on these unusual times, you're away, you're not going to have as much problem as sometimes I think we think we're going to have. You stay consistent as you can at home, and then when you're out, even if it's for a couple of weeks, sometimes you might do more warning and admonishment than you would at home, but that usually is enough to bring them back into line.
Is there anyone else burning with Sean? Okay, this is it, then we're going to wrap up. Sean?
Thank you, Gary. I have a question with regards to a child that kind of refuses to be still when you're in the midst of chastisement, or also a child who struggles with receiving verbal reproof or admonishment by holding still.
So
could you help
wigglers?
us with that? Yeah, wigglers.
Well, honey, wigglers. What do we do with wigglers?
Well, actually, the folding of the hands works for both of those. And even the child that, matter of fact, the email is just such a wonderful thing, isn't it? People give you all these progress reports. But I did receive one from a mom that had learned about the folding of the hands, went back and taught her 4-year-old and her 2-year-old, and the 4-year-old was giving her a hard time during chastisement. And so she explained the issue of getting self-control and, went through all that. And they asked her to fold her hands. And that really helped her settle down. So, of course, then the whole experience was less painful for everybody. And it's the same for following instructions. You can have them fold their hands, and that's the other thing, too, is getting the eye contact as well. But you will be surprised, pleasantly surprised at what happens with the folding of the hands.
Honey, let's close this down, and I want to do so with one more comment on chastisement. I didn't mention in the lecture series, but I think it's something that you people need to understand. If you chastise your child and your child is always angry after chastisement, it usually means, and you just take this as a tool to measure where you're at, it usually means there's too much inconsistency in the standard. It means, Mom, why is today it was a rule but it wasn't yesterday? It's that type of inconsistency on the part of the parent, and that's usually what produces the anger. Now, I'm going to stop there. We have completed now the discipline flow chart. Let me tell you about a surprise we have for you next week. And when we come back to class, just so that you know, we're going to give you a test. We are going to give you, as a class, the discipline flow chart. Your job before class starts is to fill it in from memory. All right? So while you think about that, honey, we're going to have some great food now, some fellowship with our folks, and thank you guys for joining us, and we'll try it again in our next session. Okay?